Hey, do you have a minute to save the planet? It's a familiar plea in many large American cities, usually delivered by an earnest young man or woman carrying a clipboard and a petition. Sign the petition and you help save the earth. But if you make a financial pledge to the environmental organizations he or she is supporting, do you know where the money goes? I'm Joe Hicks, and this is a PJTV special report. Now, we've teamed up with the Washington Examiner to bring you a series of special reports that examines Big Green, the huge and powerful alliance of environmental groups and causes that has become a huge force in Washington politics. By changing economic incentives, every new environmental regulation makes someone richer and someone poorer. Today, green gold. Who wins and who loses in Washington's environmental roulette?
Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, venture capital firms that buy stocks of companies that at a very low rate that make a product that can't make it in the market but will be forced into the market by the government. Politicians who have more power and say over your life and what kind of products you can use.
The environmental movement has benefited from this narrative about, it's these plucky, public interest group up against the corporate behemoths. Well, the reality is that they're now the financial behemoths, and that's sort of reflected in their salaries. I mean, they have CEO level salaries. Of the top 10 environmental executives, all 10 of them are making above $300,000 a year. Frederick Krupp, the head of Environmental Defense Fund, makes just a hair under $500,000, $496,000 a year he's making. Just for a point of comparison, Fred Smith, who's the president of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, makes just over $200,000 a year.
But then outside of the energy industry, you've got lots of companies that are looking to make money off of these regulations too. Nike, for instance, they quit the board of the Chamber of Commerce because the chamber was opposing these climate regulations that Nike supports. But Nike makes its shoes, its jackets, its golf clubs over in Asia. They don't make them here. So they're unaffected by what Congress passes. But meanwhile, Nike's smaller competitor, New Balance, they make their sneakers in New England. So Nike is lobbying for a tax on its smaller competitors. Sometimes that's how environmental regulation helps business, is by hurting a smaller competitor.
Well, I define the green regulatory state as the burden that environmental regulation is placing on our economy and our lives, our daily lives. While everybody wants to protect the environment, it is a basic American value. The question is how do we want to go about that, and where do we want to place the burden?
One of the things that's happened in the last decade in particular is that big business got in bed with Big Green. And somewhat ironically, one of the biggest backers of climate change legislation for years was BP.
On all sorts of policy issues, GE and the Obama administration have overlap, and they're also very close. GE has hired Linda Daschle as one of their lobbyists, and Tom Daschle is a very close confidant of Barack Obama's.
About a decade ago, Rahm Emanuel was working at an investment bank called Wasserstein Perella, and he made comfortable $16.2 million in the 2 years he worked there. His biggest deal there at the time was he sort of orchestrated the merger of two utility companies to create a bigger utility company that became known as Exelon Corporation. And shortly after Exelon Corporation was founded, they ended up selling off a lot of their big coal-producing electricity plants. Coal is traditionally how we manufacture electricity in this country, and they invested heavily in nuclear power. Well, since nuclear power doesn't produce any carbon emissions, Exelon immediately started lobbying for cap-and-trade laws that would suddenly make them, incredibly profitable, and they're publicly traded and everything else. So they spent about $29 million in lobbying contracts in the last 10 years. I mean, that's a lot of money to lobby Congress.
One major policy initiative that the environmental movement has been pursuing is cap-and-trade legislation that would redefine carbon dioxide as a pollutant and limit the amount of carbon U.S. companies can emit into the air. Now, this is a cause popularized by former Vice President Al Gore, who was a star witness before Congress on the proposed legislation. Now, what many don't know is that should cap-and-trade pass, Al Gore could become the world's first carbon billionaire through numerous financial ties to companies like Silver Springs Network and the venture capitalist firm Kleiner Perkins. What would cap-and-trade accomplish, and how would it affect American industry? Watch.
Al Gore is a very problematic figure in all of this because he seems to make money going and coming. He makes money giving very expensive lectures on the subject. He buys carbon offsets for his own very extravagant energy use. And yet he also invests in the very companies that do the trading in carbon offsets. So it looks like he's taking money from one pocket and putting it in his other pocket.
They want cap and trade legislation. They want limited carbon emissions, because what will happen then is it will make all of their competitors in the utility industry who make their electricity through coal that produces carbon emissions suddenly much less valuable. And that means that Exelon will be able to produce electricity at much cheaper rates, and that means that the company itself will be much more valuable.
Solar industry and the wind industry are obviously getting rich off of environmental policies. I think General Electric is one of the prime green bandits, as I call them. They would get rich off of a cap and trade plan because they have a company called Greenhouse Gas Services that invests in carbon offsets, which are a useless product if you don't have a cap and trade.
The government was giving the wrong signals to the market. It was subsidizing the wrong kind of things. And if the government is concerned about the environment, then first it should have its own Hippocratic oath and do no harm itself.
Part of what's happening here is the environmental movement has been sort of co-opted by both big business on one hand. So some of the biggest environmental lobbyists in D.C. are General Electric, and then on the other hand, you get a lot of things where you've now got big time venture capitalists. Like there's a guy named John Doerr who is a bigwig at maybe the biggest venture capital firm in the country called Kleiner Perkins. That he roped Al Gore onto the board of directors at Kleiner Perkins, and he is cooking up all kinds of investments that all again depend on lobbying the government, to pass laws with the help of the environmental lobby.
If you have a cap and trade program that rations artificially the amount of energy we can use, then carbon offsets would become more valuable. It'd be just like buying a stock or a bond or anything else you think will go up in value because it's more scarce. So that's how he'd make the money, as a trader. And so he's tried to invest on the ground floor. You see, it always depended on a political marketplace and not a real marketplace. At least when Wall Street trades things or trades futures, it's usually about cattle or pork bellies or gold or oil. That's a real commodity. Here you are going to trade an artificial commodity that doesn't actually exist in any form you can put your hands around. That's what was always rather phony about it.
Although Republicans are expected to make a strong showing in the midterm elections, cap and trade is hardly dead yet. Environmental groups are hoping to convince at least some Republicans to support the bill, while Exelon, the company Rahm Emanuel helped create, is hoping to get Democrats to act while they still hold both House and Senate. Now, if successful, Exelon's profits from cap and trade could approach $1 billion annually, according to a source cited in the New York Times. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm Joe Hicks.